Good day, learners! So, I am May Hazelness Vasquez, and I am from BS Ed Science 12A from Cebu Technological University main campus. So, today, learners, I am discussing with you learners from indigenous groups. So, the question is before we proceed to our topic, let me ask you a question. What comes into your mind when we talk about indigenous people? Any idea? Have you heard about the word indigenous people or indigenous word? So, for me to discuss it with you, indigenous means are indigenous peoples that are distinct in social and cultural groups that share collective ancestral ties to the lands and natural resources where they live, occupy, or from which they have been displaced. So, indigenous is derived from the Latin word indigena, meaning sprung from the land or native. The Latin indigena is based in the Old Latin indo, in, within, plus gignere, to beget, produce. So these people are often called native. No, these are people that sprung from the land, native. So these are the indigenous people. So what about the indigenous people do with education? What do you think? So we will talk about the indigenous quality education. So indigenous peoples tends to have less access to poorer quality and education than other groups. It's so sad to think or to know that these people were have less access to education when we were talking about education is for everyone, that everyone has the right to education. But why are these people have less access and poorer quality of education? So in the next slides, we will talk about it more further. So every year since 1994 on August 9, we celebrate United Nations International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples. And this is an opportunity to raise awareness and promote action for advancing the rights of 370 million indigenous people from over 90 countries. So this United Nations is a celebration where we raise awareness or an opportunity and promote action for indigenous people. Next is while indigenous peoples make up around 5% of the global population, they account for approximately 15% of the world's extreme poor. As you can see in the picture, the child were just eating something like a trash of food, and regularly appear at the bottom of human well-being in index ratings. So, what's the reason behind this? What's the reason for their extreme poor? Now let us look to the next slide. The reason behind this are of course complicated. But one of the key causes of this persistent disadvantage and marginalization is the lack of quality education that does not align with their rights as indigenous peoples. So the reason why these people experience extreme poor is because they lack of quality education, which does not align with their rights. So these are the following that does not align with their rights. First is education that is well resourced. Second is culturally sensitive. We must be very sensitive when it comes to cultures. It's because we have different cultures, right? And third, align with their learning needs. So next is languages, their priorities and aspirations. All of us have different languages. So we must be very careful also in prioritizing their needs, especially their languages, because they can understand other language aside from their own language, right? But if we prioritize their language as to teaching, learning things to them, and to know more about other things. Next is to deliver through culturally appropriate teaching strategies. And lastly is the culturally appropriate settings. So, next, in many cases around the world, education available to indigenous peoples is not only inappropriate, but it also threatens their very existence. So let's look at this. In addition, given the importance of lands and natural resources to the livelihoods, culture, and well being of indigenous peoples, their traditional knowledge about their lands is also interconnected to education, where elders pass down knowledge, values, and their histories to new generations. In every way, then, the right to education is connected to all other human rights of indigenous peoples, and this including their land of rights. So now let's talk about a legal and moral right to education. The right to a high quality and culturally respectful education for indigenous peoples is protected by a number of international human rights instruments, and these are including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the ILO Convention 169, and the International Covenant on Economic and Cultural and Social Rights, and then lastly the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So these are the examples of the logos that I've found in Google. So the question, what can be done to improve education outcomes for indigenous peoples? And these are the World Bank projects that have taken into account the needs and aspirations of indigenous peoples are the following. First is educational materials with social-cultural relevance. So I'll be discussing it further in the next slides. Second is a language nest. Third is inclusive curriculum. And then lastly is the bilingual education. So for educational materials with social-cultural relevance, one of the example is in Colombia, the Ministry of Education provided technical, pedagogical, and financial support for the participatory design and implementation of education projects and models of learning for indigenous peoples. So the key words here is to support financially for these children, for these indigenous groups of people. And then for language nests, originally developed in New Zealand or Aotearoa. Language nests operate like a crèche or nursery in which older Maori community members provide a childcare while speaking their language. So, language nest, on the other hand, is something like communicating with the young children and then talking while using their language, using their first dialect that they have in their social. Here is the inclusive curriculum. The project work in Mayangna experts, community members, and the Ministry of Education develop classroom materials in their language and teach their knowledge of the environment while also building social and cultural capital in Mayangna communities. Early results have been positive. Lastly is the bilingual teaching. So bilingual means having two languages in teaching. So bilingual teaching and learning have been a national policy in Paraguay since 1994. Education in two languages while respecting two cultures has served as a foundation to ensure functional and meaningful learning. Simultaneously, learning both avoids a long, complicated process of trying to prioritize one language over the other. So now, what does effective teaching students look like? What do you think? So thousands of research studies have been dedicated to finding answers to this question. But much of what we think we know or hear about Indigenous education remains mirrored in myths and legends. So there are specific pedagogies identified as effective. So most describe effective, innovative pedagogies such as pedagogies of wonder. So this involves adults listening to the wonder of the children about their own history, culture, and context, and trusting children to research this rich resource. All you need to do is to listen to these children. Next is the generative pedagogies. Here, culturally safe spaces were created for Indigenous girls to engage with their everyday experiences of oppression through writings. Third is place-based pedagogies. So also here, that takes students out of the classroom and onto country and involve rangers, teachers, and community members in a collaborative approach to teaching and learning were successful in engaging students. Lastly is the pedagogies prioritizing local Aboriginal voices that involve listening to the voices in the community and understanding the values and cultural elements that inform students in their engagement with a formal education context. Now, contributing factors to effective teaching. These are the following. Engagement strategies identified the importance of individually paced learning. Next is culturally safe learning environments. I already mentioned it earlier that children must have safe learning environments in order for them to grow, to learn, and to enjoy learning new things. Third is providing transport, food, and community-based staff working in the school. So opportunities for students' voices, local community involvement in the school, teacher understanding about their students' out-of-school lives, and lastly is a school as a place of belonging and relevance. Next is a teacher professional learning included the need for increased teacher confidence and efficacy through actively learning about local culture, history, and the impact of colonization, a shift from behavior management to subject knowledge, time and resources to adequately reflect on and improve their practice, and then lastly is ongoing engagement with Aboriginal parents and communities. Here, the right to education is a universal human right, essential to bridge gaps in human well-being, equity, and opportunity. Isn't it about time we made sure everyone can exercise these basic human rights? Yes, this is the time to exercise this basic human right because education is for all. Education is not a privilege but an opportunity to every children. It is an opportunity or it is a right for every children to have a better quality education. In summary, a primary orientation of Indigenous education is that each person is their own teacher and that learning is connected to each individual's life process. Meaning is looked for in everything, especially in the working of natural world. All things comprising nature are teachers of mankind. What is required is a cultivated and practiced openness to the lessons that the world has to teach. So these are the educational legacy of Indigenous people. Individuals are enabled to reach completeness by learning how to trust their natural instincts, to listen, to look, to create, to reflect, and see things deeply, to understand and apply their intuitive intelligence, and to recognize and honor the teacher of spirit within themselves and the natural world. So that's the educational legacy of Indigenous people.
So this time we will have an assessment. It is 1 to 15 items multiple choice. So just read and answer carefully these 15 items. So if you have any questions, just comment down below or just PM me for any questions. So that would be all, and see you in my next video. Thank you for watching.